we can make a start. Welcome everybody to day 3 of the symposium, the second full day of events. We're starting this morning with a really interesting event on active travel, walking, cycling, and the public realm. I think one of the things that I took from yesterday's presentations, for those of you that were able to join us yesterday, was how active travel really forms a backbone of the concept of the 15-minute city. There was a lot of talk about walking and cycling and how they kind of will be used to shape our 15-minute cities, 20-minute neighborhoods in the future. And so hopefully this is a kind of timely session we've got this morning. We're going to be starting with Robert Huxford, director of the Urban Design Group, talking a bit about the street design standards that have been, well, current best practice and withdrawn policy, and also providing an overview of the Introduction to Street Improvement Manual, which is something that the UDG with a number of other organisations have been working on and putting together. David McKenna is then going to give a bit more detail on the Street Improvement Manual and looking at high streets in particular and slow street principles. We'll then have a short Q&A session for Robert and David, so please do think of any questions and put them in the chat while we're preparing for that, so that we can ask those questions at the end of that session. And then for the second session for this morning, we're going to start with David Harrison and Emma Griffin from London Living Streets. They're going to be launching their footways map. Really pleased to be able to have them with us this morning for the launch of this important document. I've got my copy, it arrived yesterday in the post. Hopefully some of you have got your copies too. And then following that, we're going to have Laura and Jazine from TfL talking to us a little bit about some of the streetscape transformation work that that they've been working on as well. Because unfortunately David and Emma have to leave us, we'll have a short Q&A at the end of their presentation, and then we'll have a slightly longer Q&A session after we've heard from TfL as well. So that's the format for the morning. Hopefully everyone's settled in, they've got their coffee. I've got my coffee. I'll try and stay awake. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Robert to kick us off. Thank you.
Right, here we go. Street design standards, withdrawn, current and future practice. Very quick overview. So there we go. There are the two documents that I'm very briefly going to be talking about. A 2-page briefing sheet on street design standards, current and withdrawn practice, published by a group of organisations, including the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Urban Design Group, PRIA, the Public Realm Information Advice Network, and the Trees and Design Action Group. And then secondly, a very quick look at the Street Improvement Manual and what it's for. So a starting problem. Highway authorities, the majority of highway authorities are still using street design and adoption guidance that's based on withdrawn standards. There was a survey that the Urban Design Group conducted about 18 months ago. It found that fewer than 20% of authorities had updated their guidance, their street design standards, to reflect Manual for Streets. A Manual for Streets was published in 2007. That's a long time ago. The sort of problem that this leads to is the optimization of street environments to vehicles. And one of the questions that the survey looked at was to ask whether, in the opinion of the people responding, they thought that the highways authorities were prioritizing the street design for large refuse collection vehicles or elderly and disabled people. And the figures are there for you to see. It's large refuse collection vehicles, 32-ton, rigid bodies, that sort of thing, that are getting prioritized. Why use current practice? Well, there are codes of professional conduct that apply to a lot of different sectors, and engineering, highways, planning, it's no exception. They generally contain provisions that the members should only undertake work that they're competent to do, and the codes generally define competence as meaning the individual is up to date and has covered all relevant developments in the field. There's a sting in the tail here with professional indemnity insurance. The professional indemnity insurance policies generally have a clause that says the insured should act in a way to minimize the risk of claims. And if an individual is undertaking work that involves them breaching a code of professional conduct, then it's not really demonstrably acting in a way so as to minimize the risk of claims. Quite the reverse. Why use current practice? Well, it's about complying with current law and discharging statutory duties. The public sector equality duty that is in the Equality Act 2010. There's a duty on public health. We've got the legal requirement to meet the zero carbon target by 2050. The Traffic Regulation Act, that places specific duties on people to exercise, on traffic authorities to exercise the functions. And then there's the common law duty of care. It places a duty of care on highway authorities with regard to both careful and negligent road users. It's careful and negligent road users. Withdrawn and current practice, what do we have? The old era, Roads in Urban Areas, published by the Ministry of Transport in 1966. We've got Design Bulletin 32, published in 1977, as opposed to current guidance, Manual for Streets 1, that was published in 2007, and a range of different documents that run up to this year with the Local Transport Note 0120, Cycle Infrastructure Design. So drawing some contrasts, the withdrawn guidance places priority on vehicles rather than people. The current guidance from 2007 onwards, well, Manual for Streets has a user hierarchy that places pedestrians and cyclists first and considers last other motor traffic. We mentioned the public sector equality duty, that places elderly and disabled people above all those groups. And children, they are a group that's covered in the common law duty of care. And I'll go on to that in the next slide. These things are echoed in the National Planning Policy Framework and in the new National Plan for Cycling and Walking that's called Gear Change, published a couple of months ago. Layout, the withdrawn guidance, it advocates distributor roads and environmental areas. You can see it in that slide, in that illustration. We've got a residential area that is surrounded by a cell of main roads that are designed and optimized for vehicles. And there you have a photograph of a distributor road. Dear me, I'm in trouble. Sorry about that. A distributor road that it has no overlooking, no frontage access, and most distributor roads don't go in a direction that pedestrians really need to go in. They tend to orbit. Current guidance, Manual for Streets, it advocates connected, permeable, traffic calmed and inclusive street layouts. And there in that illustration, you can recognize the layout of a traditional town. It's compact, it optimizes the use of land, it creates walkable distances. It's very much to be recommended. And unfortunately, so much of greenfield development is based on the diagram that you see on the left-hand side, and that is an absolute scandal. It is wholly wrong. Speed in the old era was to be controlled solely by speed limits, and the road geometry would be actually increased to enable speeds greater than speed limits. The current guidance is to set a design speed of 20 miles an hour or below. And bear in mind that younger children, research shows, cannot judge oncoming traffic traveling at more than 20 miles an hour. This is a very important consideration in terms of discharging that common law duty of care owed to all road users. Manual for Streets was based on some research conducted by the Transport Road Research Laboratory, published in the form of TRL report 661, and they looked at the way street geometry influences driver speed. It's illustrated in that diagram there. You use forward visibility and road width to influence the speed at which drivers choose to drive at. You don't use geometry to accommodate driver speed. It's a fundamental difference, fundamental. Junctions. The old standards, there tends to be a ban on the use of crossroads and an advocacy for the use of staggered junctions. Crossroads are really good. They make very permeable layouts. They're easy for pedestrians to understand. They create direct routes. Staggered junctions don't do that. Also, there's a predilection for the use of DMRB roundabouts, standard roundabouts. They use up a lot of space. They're awkward for cyclists. The design manual for roads and bridges is a standard for motorways and trunk roads, not urban streets. It shouldn't be used in urban areas. So manual for streets, it advocates using a broad range of junction types within a 20-mile-an-hour environment. And there you can see T, Y, and crossroads, as well as different configurations, including squares and circuses and crescents. So there's an opportunity to incorporate green space, tree planting, in a far more attractive environment, as well as providing functional movement for traffic. Junctions. The old era advocated junctions with large corner radii, 4 meters, 6 meters, up to 15 meters. This creates long pedestrian paths for pedestrians crossing side streets. It's awkward for disabled people, and cars and vehicles turning into side roads can travel at high speed, maybe 25 miles an hour or more, and this presents a significant danger to pedestrians. So Manual for Streets advocates small corner radii, 1 meter or less. It slows traffic to 10 or 15 miles an hour. It provides a very short pedestrian route across the side road, and there is the potential to create an environment where blind and partially sighted people can cross between parallel curbs. Footways, they should be level. They shouldn't be sloped. If you're a wheelchair user, it is an absolute drag if your path along as you move along a footway involves sloping over to one side every time you go past somebody's house, the crossover to their driveway. Manual for Streets advocates a minimum 900mm wide strip that is at normal footway crossfalls. And there is I think is a particularly elegant example in Coventry. There's a special curb unit that accommodates the vehicle ramp, and for the entire width of the footway is level. That's about putting pedestrians first and vehicles second. Cycling. This is the current guidance and plan published this year. Its emphasis is to provide for cyclists from 8 to 80 years of age, whereas the old era was very much providing an environment for cyclists that required pretty competent cyclists, male, middle-aged, lycra wearing. This is about providing cycling facilities, enabling cycling for the whole community. And the last point, I think, of Manual for Streets, creating quality places. And this is also echoed in the planning system. This is what we should be aspiring to above all. So there it is. That's the briefing sheet. There's nothing in the presentation that's not covered in this briefing sheet, and there's quite a lot more, including severe warnings about using withdrawn standards. We're using standards based on withdrawn guidance. There's the issue of negligence. There's the issue of loss of professional indemnity cover, and potentially there's the loss of the immunity from civil action that local government councillors and officers enjoy. So moving on to the Street Improvement Manual. Well, this is a sandbox for ideas for street improvement manuals to come. It's an opportunity for individuals to advance their innovative ideas, for debate, for discussion, prior to maybe a professional institution or government incorporating these ideas in guidance to come. Many different organisations have participated, and individuals so far, not least London Living Streets. So here you see some information on pedestrians, on walking speeds, on the ability to cross roads. There's nothing like this in street design guidance in the UK, at least published by the DFT at the moment. There needs to be as much information on pedestrians and cyclists as there is on vehicles. There needs to be a balance there. Crossing the street. Here are a set of ideas that were generated by Colin Davis of Pryan to improve the informal crossings at the mouth of roundabouts. Main Streets, Graham Smith and Brian Deegan of Urban Movement came up with a whole set of ideas for improving cycling facility on standard width carriageways. This is for a 30-foot carriageway, 9.2 metres. Britain is based on a lot of standardized measurements. The 30-foot carriageway was very commonplace in the 1920s. You ended up with a 3-lane road, 3 10-foot wide lanes. The middle lane became known as the lane of death, an overtaking lane. Often hatched out, why not use this surplus space to provide cycle lanes? Makes so much sense. Junctions, Brian Deegan, again from Urban Movement, provided some diagrams for arrangements to protect cyclists from left-turning vehicles and a number of other ideas. And we've got David McKenna speaking shortly about shopping streets. Plenty of ideas there. So that's the summary. Use current guidance, and please thinking about contributing to improved practice by adding your ideas to the Street Improvement Manual. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Robert. David, over to you.
Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Right. So I'm David McKenna. I'm a landscape architect and engineer who set up as a sole practitioner a year ago after working for 15 years with IBI Group, where I sort of led the UK landscape team. And a lot of the projects I'm going to talk about were done whilst I was at IBI Group. One of my contributions to the Street Improvement Manual is a sort of discussion piece on slow streets. And that's something I came to really from my sort of experience with pedestrian priority projects. I designed this project in Castle Square, Carnarvon, which was completed in 2008, which used to have this sort of winding road through it with lots of clutter in the middle of the street, in the middle of the space. And what we were aiming to do was really open up views to the castle and to the premises around the space, where previously it was just a very cluttered space and view. And that enabled all sorts of events to take place in the town, which brings people and money to the town. A similar project in Kidderminster, a town square, that I sort of had to really sort of think to make a square out of this space, or make it a space, because it was previously a road junction. It's based on the sort of penny black stamp, the black granite and the white detailing, because Sir Rowland Hill's statue stood in the middle of the space, and he started the modern postal system, and is from Kidderminster. So that space takes all the traffic that it used to take through it. All these spaces are quite low level traffic, but we did accommodate all the traffic that used to be there. But previously, it was just a big tarmac junction, basically. There wasn't a space there at all. And then I'll talk a bit more about this later, but this is Frodsham Street in Chester, which is a pedestrian priority street, which was praised by the local blind and partially sighted groups. It won, well, it's the current Healthy Street of the Year, and has previously won Chartered Inship Highways and Transportation and Creating Better Places Award and Transport Practitioners Urban Design Award. So there's two main inputs I've had to the manual. One was just producing a range of layout options for different street widths, which was really sort of focused on high streets, as Robert said. So it's for building widths 9 metres, 11 metres, 14 metres and 19 metres, which are drawn from Robert's sort of historic standards. And there were one-way traffic and two-way traffic for each of these. So I'll just go through some of the options for one of those street widths, which is the 36-foot highway, which is 11.3 metres, and this is with a 7.3 metre carriageway. So all these options, I'm not saying which is best or which is appropriate for your location. It's really just saying this is the range to choose from. So it's just to sort of give you, so you know what you can do. So you could just be a parking street like that, with parking both sides, which you see a lot. Or it could have cycleways on both sides and a contraflow cycle on one side. Or you could have a cycle lane down one side and parklets down the other. or parking with parklets interspersed, or parklets and footway widening, and then the cyclists are in the carriageway on this one. Or in this one, the carriageway sort of moves across the road and allows you to focus the sort of social infrastructure, I call it, on one side of the road, and that was in parklet form. This is in a sort of without parklets, which sort of opens social infrastructure up to the street a bit more. And then painting the carriageway, it helps to change the character of the space. So like I said, I've done that for a number of street widths, and you can just look through and just choose or see what the options are for your area. So the other area I sort of concentrated on was slow streets, and there are a few definitions of slow streets, and I'm sort of defining it as any street that locates social infrastructure in the carriageway to calm the traffic and generate a sense of pedestrian ownership of the carriageway. The social infrastructure of a slow street can be installed under the 1999 traffic calming regulations. And slow streets, they basically create space within an urban environment by slowing the traffic speeds and allow other functions to happen in the street. The idea is they'll feel more like a destination than a through route. So like I say, I drew on my experience in pedestrian priority design, where we use particularly benches. They're the best piece of social infrastructure, but cafe seating as well, to help slow traffic down and create a different environment. So this is what Frottingham Street in Chester looks like, and you can see the pedestrians quite happy to walk in the middle of the carriageway there space. And I suppose, whereas there's quite a lot of detail in the manual of sort of how, or the design elements of slow streets, what I wanted to talk about here and ask people really is the question on the left there: to what extent is the pedestrians walking in the carriageway that makes the drivers slow, or the drivers driving slowly that enables people to feel that they can walk in the carriageway? So is the answer both of these, and is this sort of a virtuous circle that we could try and start to create? And then what elements of the street is making this happen? And particularly I'm looking at the curb here. So this is a flush surface, obviously, whereas the slow street principle, I'm assuming that you retain a curb. It's a sort of a lighter touch solution to this. But what I'm saying is that the curb is only one element of the street. So although you're losing that sort of flush surface, you still have all these other elements of the street that help change the character to make it a more pedestrian friendly environment. So now this is the same piece of that street beforehand. And so what I'm sort of thinking is, well, what's the difference between these two streets? The urban form is the same. The traffic is the same traffic that we had before, but the traffic speeds, you can see, are quite a lot higher. So the traffic flows haven't changed, the urban form hasn't changed. The curb is now a flush curb, but also these other environmental and placemaking elements have been introduced that make people more comfortable walking in the carriageway, whereas at the moment people are just walking on the footway here, and people feel very uncomfortable, and you see someone rushing across the carriageway it's not a place for people. So I'd say what I'm seeing really is a curb as just one element of this. Now, are there sort of cheaper, quicker ways to develop this pedestrian priority principle in the form of a slow street that you can retrofit? So this is a drive-through into the street, and I just want to sort of keep an eye on the speed going into this street here. So you notice that I slowed down going into there, and I suppose that the question is, what's making me slow down going into that space? Is it the lack of a curb, or is it the pedestrians in the carriageway? Is it the seating? And again, while I'm driving through here, what is making me drive very cautiously? And I'd say it's not specifically the lack of a curb. It's the people, basically, in the carriageway that are making me drive slowly. So the question then I'm asking is, rather than us trying to design streets to make traffic go slowly, should we be trying to design streets that enable and encourage people to walk more freely in the carriageway space? And you can see these totems, they sort of create, the idea is that they're what guides the traffic, and they create a pedestrian only zone down either side. So could a similar pedestrian only zone help keep people feeling like they can enter the street, but make drivers feel they have less ownership of the street, and start creating that sort of virtuous spiral that slows the traffic? So getting, say, benches, particularly important element to that. And that's me just arrived at the main street in Chester. So so this slow street principle exists in the UK, but very, very few locations. Leonard Circus is an excellent example, where you've got a full curb around, but you still created a space, and that you have that pedestrian priority concept. If you have any other places, let me know. And then lastly, I'm just going to mention placemaking a bit more, and this is Accrington Town Square, which I did at IBI Group. These pieces of benches and artwork helped guide traffic in this very low traffic environment, but that used to look like that. So the importance of placemaking as a element of traffic management here, and so that includes things like, I designed the building lighting here, so that really transforms that evening environment. And this artwork that was on the benches helps people make a real connection with the place, and makes people want to use the place and feel that they can use that's their space, and they can use the carriageway. So yeah, so that's it from me, really. But really, just summarising, it's not all about the curb. Pedestrian priority can be applied to traditional streets. Placemaking is a traffic management tool, and I'd say there's more information on this in the street improvement manual. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. Thanks for that. Right, we've got a few minutes for a couple of questions. There's been a few that have been coming through in the chat. I'm going to start with Julia Thrift with a question around trees, and the fact that the planning white paper says all new developments should have tree-lined streets. Just sort of wondering what your thoughts on that. I've just pulled up, as we were chatting there, my copy of Trees in Towns and Cities from 1958, Ministry of Housing and Local Governments. So the idea of needing more trees in our towns and villages and cities isn't a new thing, but sort of what are some of the pragmatic issues around that? Obviously, highway engineers, you hear horror stories about them not wanting them, and local authorities not wanting maintenance, and utility companies not wanting them within 100 meters of their utilities. Sort of what's the answer, do we think?
On the tree front, I know it's fashionable to bash highway engineers. In the discussions yesterday, planners seem to be getting bashed, but they have serious problems with gross lack of funding. They're very reluctant to take on additional maintenance liabilities, and a lot of the legacy of street trees that we've got are actually due to engineers in the from 1900s through in the Victorian period and beyond, planting trees. What we need now, because of the large amount of utilities that occupy underground spaces, we need an approach to 3D design of streets. It's not just about surface. We need appropriate design options for the understreet, and we need a legislative system that reflects this. We need shared utility ducts, combined utility ducts, so that there's not a permanent interruption of tree roots. They need space to grow in. So the current system, where there's basically no control over what happens under a street surface, that needs to change. We need to get far more sophisticated.
Thank you. Okay, another question from Neil is actually about the argument that some of the good practice guidance that that you mentioned, Robert, is still unfortunately trumped by statutory duties, such as Section 16 of the 2004 Road Traffic Management Act that requires local highway authorities to achieve expeditious movement of traffic while only having regard to other concerns. Is it time that we need a new Highways Act to put proper user hierarchy on a statutory footing?
What happens is that there's a sort of system of Chinese whispers. What Act says, it tends to be passed from one person to the next, and what gets lost is what the Acts actually say. So the network management duty, I'll read it. It is the duty of a local traffic authority to manage their road network with a view to achieving, so far as may reasonably be practical, having regard to their other obligations, policies and objectives, the following objectives. A, securing the expeditious movement of traffic on the authority's road network. So it is a qualified duty, and these are duties, these are called target duties. They're there to be balanced against all of the other duties that placed upon a local authority, such as public health. So always go back to the source legislation, read it, and it can be understood. And also the Traffic Management Act, it defines traffic as including pedestrians. And the COVID-19 emergency guidance, which is led to a lot of this road space reallocation that TfL will be talking about, that's also been issued under the 2004 Traffic Management Act. So it's there to be balanced. The duties don't stand in the way of best practice. The duties require best practice. Do we need a new Highways Act a revision of Highways Act 1980? No, we don't, provided highway authorities get up to speed, and particularly their councillors adapt to the new era.
Thank you. David, probably one for you here, actually. A couple of people have put similar sort of questions, and it's around the issue of how we can accommodate sort of people with disabilities and manage people, particularly blind people's abilities to get round schemes. Comments on places like Poynton, where disabled groups have said that they basically can't go out anymore, and problems such as that. I mean, have you got any advice or any thoughts on that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The CIHT review of shared space is very useful in defining pedestrian priority streets as different from the informal street, which is Poynton. So I think starting the discussion with understanding which type of street you're looking at is important. Somewhere like Poynton, I mean, my opinion is that could handle signalised crossings. So perhaps that would help with blind and partially sighted users. Some people, I think, don't like that in an informal street, but that's my personal view. My sort of specialism is really in the sort of pedestrian priority environment, and that's where Frodsham Street has been praised as the best street in Chester by the local blind and partially sighted groups. They've led tours for me, taking Transport for Greater Manchester around the scheme, saying, look, when can you do more streets like this in Chester? Because we created a pedestrian-only zone down the side with no street furniture or clutter in it that they were able to walk up and down with quickly and easily. So that's within the shared space argument discussion. But I suppose the talk there I was having was about slow streets, and that assumes you retain the curb and the footway as is. So I think there should be less issues there, because you do have that sort of protected pedestrian zone retained within the slow street. But hopefully the idea is that you end up with slower traffic speeds, so it makes it safer for everybody in crossing the street.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, there are a few more questions, and there's actually quite a lot of chat going on in the chat window. So hopefully, maybe both David and Robert can contribute to that. But I want to push on because we're the first session of the day, and I'll be lynched if we overrun because it'll mess up the whole day. So